Today I learned. In the early days of U.S. elections, the path to the vice presidency was anything but a deliberate choice. During an opening chapter of American history, the second-place finisher in the presidential election became the vice president, regardless of party affiliation or compatibility. In 1796, the second U.S. presidential election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, voters cast their ballots for their preferred president with no separate selection for vice president. John Adams, the Federalist candidate, narrowly edged out Jefferson, the Democratic Republican. But Jefferson, his avowed political opponent, became his vice president. This system led to several unintended consequences. Political alliances became unpredictable as ambitious politicians jockeyed for second place to secure the VP slot. Campaign strategies shifted, with candidates focusing on beating their own party colleagues as much as the opposing party. In 1804, the 12th Amendment revamped the system, allowing candidates to choose their own running mates, ensuring greater ideological harmony within the executive branch. The era of accidental VPs and lopsided administrations came to an end. Did you know? Inauguration Day 1841. Crowds roar as William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, takes the oath of office. The war hero, the log cabin dweller, the man promising simpler times for America. But history had its own plan. Just 31 days later, amidst controversies and a raging fever, Harrison would breathe his last breath, leaving behind a presidency as fleeting as a breeze. His campaign, a masterclass in political alchemy, had spun Harrison into a folksy frontiersman, starkly contrasting his wealthy background and political savvy. Log cabins were built on parade floats, cider barrels rolled through cheering crowds, and Harrison basked in the glow. It was a brilliant, if slightly disingenuous, performance that swept him into office. But the curtain fell abruptly on that inaugural stage. Pneumonia, or perhaps typhoid fever, took hold of Harrison. And 31 days after his inauguration, he was dead. In a little over a month, Old Tippecanoe went from conquering hero to fallen icon. His presidency, the shortest in American history, stands as a reminder that even the most carefully crafted narratives can crumble in the face of reality. Did you know? In 1900, the American dollar faced major instability. Fluctuating between silver and gold, the currency lacked consistency. Businesses and investors grappled with uncertainty, hindering economic growth. President William McKinley aimed to calm this volatile situation with the Gold Standard Act. This legislation anchored the dollar's value directly to gold, aiming to foster stability and attract foreign investment. Essentially, it declared a specific amount of gold equal to $1. The effects were immediate. The dollar gained trust, boosting trade and prompting an economic boom. Foreign investments poured in, fueling industrial growth and development. However, the gold standard had its drawbacks. The fixed link to gold created a system susceptible to inflation. As the economy expanded, the limited gold supply meant fewer dollars chasing more goods. This pushed prices up, disproportionately impacting farmers whose income stayed relatively flat, squeezing them into debt cycles. Meanwhile, industrialists benefiting from cheap loans prospered, widening the wealth gap. The gold standard sparked decades of debate, culminating in its abandonment in 1971. Did you know? Theodore Roosevelt, a charismatic politician and advocate for antitrust reform, found himself unexpectedly thrust into the presidency in 1901. Initially elected as vice president to appease his political opponents, conservatives saw the vice presidency as a way to contain Roosevelt, believing the position held little real power. Prior to becoming vice president, Roosevelt had established himself as a progressive reformer, tackling political corruption and advocating for social justice. His strong stance against monopolies and trusts made him a darling of the progressive movement. Fate, however, had other plans. 6 months into his term, President William McKinley was struck down by an assassin, leaving the nation in shock and Roosevelt as the new president. Suddenly, the once marginalized vice president found himself at the helm of the nation. And he didn't waste any time. Fueled by his progressive ideals, Roosevelt ushered in an era of unprecedented reform. He became known as the Trust Buster, aggressively pursuing antitrust legislation and taking on powerful corporate giants like Standard Oil and Northern Securities Company. Roosevelt's reformist zeal extended beyond the marketplace. He also championed labor rights, advocating for fair wages and safe working conditions. Did you know? His voice radiated through crackling radios, offering Americans a beacon of hope during their darkest hour. Franklin D. Roosevelt, elected in 1933, wasn't just ushering in a new administration. He was embarking on a historic journey, becoming the longest-serving president in U.S. history. FDR's 12 years in office were anything but ordinary. He faced a nation racked by the Great Depression, dust storms on the plains, and World War II. Through it all, he championed bold policies, leaving an indelible mark on American society. The New Deal, Roosevelt's ambitious response to the Depression, saw vast reforms, from building infrastructure to providing social safety nets. As the Dust Bowl ravaged the Midwest, forcing millions from their homes, Roosevelt tackled this environmental crisis with programs like the Soil Conservation Service. Then came World War II, a conflict that demanded decisive leadership. As commander-in-chief, Roosevelt guided America to victory. But such immense power didn't come without questions. Fearing a permanent presidency, America eventually ratified the 22nd Amendment in 1951, limiting future presidents to 2 terms. Did you know? Forget lavish White House dinners and presidential salaries. Let's rewind to a time when leaving the top job in America could leave you financially stranded. Harry S. Truman, the president who led the nation through World War II and its aftermath, struggled to make ends meet after leaving office. After years of public service, Truman had little personal wealth. His presidential salary didn't keep up with inflation, and his modest post-presidency income hardly covered his bills. His situation became so dire that Congress, in a rare moment of bipartisan empathy, stepped in. In 1958, they passed the Former Presidents Act, providing a pension and other benefits to ensure future presidents wouldn't face financial hardship after leaving office. Herbert Hoover, the only other living former president at the time, also took the pension, although he didn't need it. It is reported that Hoover did so to avoid embarrassing Truman. Did you know? In August 1943, with World War II raging, young Lieutenant John F. Kennedy's PT boat was rammed by a Japanese destroyer. As the boat sank into the Pacific, Kennedy swam for miles, with an injured crewmate in tow, until they reached a tiny speck of an island. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just sand, coconuts, and the occasional shark fin. Stranded in hostile waters, JFK became resourceful. Using a pocket knife, he carved a distress message into the shell. Days later, a native scout spotted the coconut floating offshore, leading to JFK's rescue. That coconut became JFK's personal talisman, which he displayed proudly in the Oval Office as a reminder of his resilience and ingenuity. Did you know? August 9, 1974. Consumed by the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon chose the path of resignation, throwing the nation into turmoil. But amidst the drama, an almost eerie detail went unnoticed. No former U.S. presidents were alive to witness this historic moment. As Nixon delivered his televised address, the Oval Office was strangely empty. There were no elder statesmen to offer counsel or presidential predecessors to share the gravity of his decision. Nixon was truly alone, facing the consequences of his actions under the unforgiving gaze of history. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president, passed away in 1969. Harry Truman, the 33rd, followed him in 1972. And Lyndon Johnson, the 36th, died just months before Nixon's resignation. The absence of living former presidents underscored the weight of Nixon's legacy. There was no historical precedent to turn to and no guiding compass of presidential conduct from former leaders. This absence wasn't just a historical footnote, it symbolized a moment when the nation stood alone, confronting its history and charting a new course for the future. Did you know?